Hey Quilties, it's Karen Marchetti. This time on Dual Process, Jodi Robinson and I are working on a Dresden Plate quilt. We both have a great idea for you, so grab your printable and we'll get started. Hey guys, it's Karen. So for my idea, I'm trying to keep it as continuous as possible, and I'm going to assume that we can get about this much in each pass so that we can do this in 3 passes. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to loopy loop in my background, and I'm going to get here, and I'm going to stitch a continuous kind of like a continuous curve essentially from here to this corner, this corner, this corner, and cross over. And it makes this really cool effect when you're done. So again, just from crossing at the bottom, so like a crossed continuous curve. Start on this point here, up, cross over. And before I leave, I'm going to stitch around that circle and then right back into the loopies. And this way, well, as long as you're using one thread color, it would be continuous. Just filling in the background as we go. And this goes pretty fast. And again, this is a digital whiteboard, so all you see is this purple ink on the white. If you were quilting, it would probably be very similar thread color, and it would not look like that. It would just look like texture. So I'm going to stitch over to this one now, and you see how I left my bottom kind of jagged? That's because on the pass back I want to kind of nest it together, and then you don't notice the straight line of the swirlies, and that'll make more sense when I come back. So from here we'll stitch to here. Let's do that circle so we don't forget. And again, that continuous curve in the Dresden, or crossed continuous curve. So again, we're on this corner, out, up, and back over, crossing at the bottom. And then the last one, and then we're right back into the loopies. So it is very continuous. And if you vary the size of your loopies, it does add more visual interest. So we're going to come back down the side over here, and we'll go back across. Again, see how I'm trying to keep that kind of jagged, I guess is the best word, so that when I come back with these loopies, they kind of nest together. And that is all dependent on how much throat space you have. But you don't ever want to just do your loopies in a straight line, because when you come back, you'll see that line visually. You want to always kind of nest them the best you can. So for the next pass, my needle is still down. I'm just going to roll with the needle down. So once we've rolled, our needle's still here. Just going to go right back into the loopies and fill this next section. Right to there. I'm going to go in and fill our Dresden. And again, this is much messier than if it were being stitched, but I hope that you get the idea of the design. I'll finish that one and right back out with the loopies. So I have to leave myself that exit to come back. All right, we don't want to forget about that. All right, just finish this up. And with the loopies, it doesn't matter. They don't all have to alternate. You can have some that go the same direction like that. It's just more about movement. All right, now I'll leave my needle down. Now I'll roll this last section. So I'll keep doing this and I'll bring you back at the end. Okay, so we're just going to finish up that last little section of loopies and then we'll tie off. And there is your finished quilt, hopefully as continuous as possible, as long as you don't run out of bobbin. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Hi everyone, this is Jodi. In this episode of Dual Process, we are working with this pretty little Dresden Plate wall hanging. And as you look at this design, you can kind of see some markings on here, and that is because if I personally were to quilt this design, I wanted you to be able to see what I would mark, and I would probably mark it ahead of time before I even load the quilt, just because I find it a little bit easier a lot of times to do that ahead of time. So in this yellow, you can see around the outside edges, we have kind of these curvy lines. I would make them random because we're going to put leaves on there. And so I feel like they work really well to be, you know, kind of flowing organic lines. And you'll notice around the center portion, that center Dresden, I've done that as well. And then to connect each of these Dresden plate blocks, I mean, we have the nice little points on the ends of the plates. So I always like, you know, if I can, use what's there. And by just simply connecting one to the other, it can create this area. And so would you need to mark it? It just depends what that actual spacing is. If that was a very small space, like maybe 10 inches, and you knew that you had a long enough ruler to touch the points of 2 blocks and do it, you wouldn't need to mark. But a lot of times I just do anyway, because then I start to quilt and I can just follow these lines. So let's go ahead and get started. And what I'm going to do is, I'm assuming if this is a wall hanging, I probably can reach the first 2 rows. If you know that you can't, you definitely would want to pre-mark these straight lines, because you would need to, you know, start and stop to pick up to stitch those. So the first thing that I would want to do is kind of the main stitching. And by that I mean, I would probably actually start off by stitching these lines that I can reach. So, you know, because this design is a custom quilting thing, we may not be able to, you know, kind of flow continuously throughout the whole quilt, and that's okay. I mean, it's not always possible to do that. So I would go ahead and, well, actually, I would probably stitch this plate in the ditch around the outside first, because that's going to allow me to get at least 2 things done at once. So if I start right here, and I would, ooh, a little messy, but I would stitch in the ditch around here. Then when I get to this point, I can go ahead and stitch in this line. And the choice is yours. I probably would go ahead and do this too, mostly so I don't forget. That happens a lot. And then at that point, I can go ahead and stitch these lines. Whoops. And then I would tie off. Then I would go ahead and come into this area and go ahead and just simply get these lines stitched in. Oh my goodness, they're so wobbly. Tie off. Repeat that same thing over here. And then come into this center, and I would go ahead and outline, stitch in the ditch, this center plate. And then tie off. The next step for me would probably be to do the stitching within these plates that I can reach, because it's not a whole lot of quilting, and so, you know, it's not like I'm adding something super dense that might distort anything in there. So I would just come into the center, might as well start in the center, that's where I was, and I would probably stitch this in the ditch. It would look a little straighter than that. So then what we're going to do is I would use a curved ruler, depending on the size of the block. If it was a smaller block, I might freehand these curves, but you know, to play it safe, I would probably use a ruler. But I'm going to stitch from the bottom point in here up to this where they meet and back down. So you're spanning 2 each time. Oh boy. Oh, wrong one. Then at that point, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, but on these alternating areas that we've not done it on. So I would just back stitch a little bit right here, and then repeat that same process using these points. It's always really nice if you can do something that creates a pattern by simply connecting areas of your piecing, because it makes things a lot easier. You don't need to mark. Okay, so that finishes up that one. Oh, we missed this one. And then of course I would tie off because I need to, and then I do that. I'd repeat the same process up here. Stitch this center, connect point to point from the bottom to the top, spanning 2, oh my goodness, they're so wobbly when you do on the computer. It's kind of bad here. Let's fix that one. Jeez. Back stitch just a little bit. Repeat that process again. Tie off, and then come over to this next one and do the same. Center in there. And if you wanted that to be maybe more quilted, you could always add, I don't know, something maybe like pebbling to make that kind of a little more stitched down. Oh my gosh. Backtrack and repeat. Okay, so that completes that process. Depending on, I mean, this is a fair amount of quilting. You know, you may decide, so essentially the fairly open quilting that we've done at this point is probably enough that you could advance and repeat that same process to do these two before you do the rest. But because actually nothing in the quilting plan is totally, you know, really dense or anything, I'm totally fine to just go ahead and fill in these open areas that I've marked for. And so what I'm going to do is, and it's, you know, the choice is yours, how you like yours to flow, but I have a tendency to make everything flow that way. So I'll do that around the center as well as around the outside. I'm just going to, oh, my marking went away. Let me mark it in here again. Whoop, that one's a little too, gotta fix it. Okay, so I would, you know, start right at the top probably. And we want to use this seam right here as like the outside edge, because we're going to add something else on that small area. So I might actually even, I know I can reach this far, so I may go ahead and stitch this in the ditch as well, just because it's going to help me to remember not to go out into that small strip around the outside edge. It's kind of like it'd be stitched and you notice that's a stop point. So I'm just going to start right here at the where I can reach to, and I'm just going to start to add these leaves on. And I don't generally stitch the spine because you see how the leaves come back down to the spine. You're going to form it without needing to actually stitch it. And just work my way along here. Now, when I come to this point, I'm going to travel along this stitch in the ditch, and I'm just going to continue and just do one side in here to let me travel to get where I need, and then we're back to this one, so we can just continue moving with that. And you could certainly make them go the other way, or again, when I get to the outside edge, I'm just going to go ahead and add in what I need to allow this to get me where I need to go. If you can fit a little one in there. And then I'm going to be, the nice thing I think anyway with leaves is that you really, you know, you can start and stop if you need to very easily and pick up again when you advance the quilt, because you can blend right in where you started and stopped because it's not a super precise design. And then I would tie off at that point. So then we're going to go into the center, and using that marked spine, we're going to do the exact same thing. This time we're taking it out to those lines and into the plate. And you can make them all different shapes and sizes, because as it comes in to that center block, you do need to have different sizes in order to get down into the little points and dips in there. Have some bigger ones. You could, of course, be adding some little spines to each leaf. I'm just going to work my way around, knowing that probably I can't reach too much farther on this one, so I'm just going to go ahead and stop right there and tie off. At this point, I would advance the quilt, and you see what I mean when I said, so let's pretend now that, of course, we've advanced the quilt. It'd be very easy for me to just tie back on right here and continue with these. So after I advance this quilt, I would just do the exact same process. I would get these lines stitched in first, do the plates, and then continue to fill in the rest of the leaves. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, and then to finish this up, I also forgot to do my little stitch in the ditch here. Let me get that in there. So at this point, because we have this little strip and you probably can't do nothing, and I didn't really want to take the leaves all the way out to the tips, because then you run the risk of, had we done leaves out to here, of going a little bit too far, and then when you put your binding on, you could easily cut off the tips. So I took away my line there. So what I decided might look really nice is to just simply break this in half with one straight line, because it's really going to echo what we did in these bars that kind of connect those plates. So being now at the bottom of the quilt, I probably would start, where I can reach, which would probably be right about here. And I would go down all the way across. And then as far as I can go, I would leave my needle in the fabric, roll the quilt, tighten it back up, and then I can just continue stitching. And do it without tying off. So I hope you guys enjoyed that design and that you might give it a try. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope that you have enjoyed today's designs, and be sure to join us for the next episode of Dual Process.